Gotcha.
I don't know if it's mine or yours. I got a lag. It's probably mine. Terrible service here.
I think it is yours, Jason. Your voice kind of glitches every once in a while.
Does it really?
Just a little. It's not bad. Brian, you doing okay today?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Oh, great. I'm glad you reminded me so I don't say anything inappropriate.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey there. I missed part 1. Can I still come to part 2?
Absolutely.
It's gonna cost you twice as much.
We know who to ask the questions to now.
I'll make it up.
I'm sure you will.
After last night, I didn't have time, but I need to add iPad instructions. Write that down.
That was pretty good last night. I've enjoyed that.
It was cool.
I thought it was fun.
Buddy, the dog's just sitting there looking at me like, why are you talking to your screen so much? You know?
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. How are you?
Good. Are you doing okay?
Just the sniffles, I think. It's just annoying, that's all.
Yeah, the weather's been super nice, so I know people are dealing with allergies too.
How's everybody else?
Good.
I haven't figured out why the volume didn't work on my laptop, and I didn't want to mess it up today, so I just went ahead and did it on my phone.
Oh, okay.
So there must be a setting on my laptop that for some reason I was allowed to have volume work or something.
Mm-hmm. You might have a toggle between different speakers too, or input options, maybe.
Okay.
Love your flag in the background, Lisa. That's cool.
Oh, thanks. That's our office/laundry room. Dickie put that up there. Yeah. He likes flags. That's a good thing.
It is.
Just giving people a couple more minutes.
So, Kaylin, on your screen, since you have control, can you see who all is on? Because
Yes.
last night, you know, it took us a while, but we finally figured out how to, you know, how to see everybody that was on at the same time. But for the longest time, we couldn't when the, you know, when we were looking at a shared screen or part like a slide like this.
Mm-hmm.
But you
Now,
can see.
yeah, I can see everybody. Now, when you are in share screen mode, what happens is the video itself captures the person who's talking. So they'll pop in and out based on who's talking. And there is a little bit of a difference in you guys probably being able to see everything just because the focus is the presentation. But if I don't share a screen, then I think it enables more viewing options from what I'm gathering. So.
Yeah, I'm playing with it now. I can actually change to a grid view rather than that straight down. I see.
Yeah, the grid
Just
view
learning.
is what I was trying to get people to find yesterday.
I was talking to Steve Snook this morning, and he's our regional Remax guy out of Kansas City, and he was talking about how much this program has helped them, you know, with everything that's going on, still be able to see people and communicate with people. And, you know, it is a pretty awesome deal. Even something fun like we did last night.
Mm-hmm.
Really neat.
I thought about sending him a couple of these videos for the Momentum Facebook group to see if he liked them.
Any ideas we can send him would probably help for sure.
And we had a Team Jane Kelly staff meeting first time this morning using it, so it
Oh,
worked out.
cool.
Yeah, got the chance to see everybody back. You know, you see their faces at least. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Which helps a lot. I mean, it's one thing to be talking to somebody, and it's another to see them and see their emotion, and
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
See if they're sloughing off and not paying attention.
That's usually me. Forces me to look at the screen.
Yeah. It's harder for me to focus on the information though. I'm better if I'm right in the room around people, because I'm on the phone part of this. You can only see, a few people on the screen, and then you don't know if someone's going to talk. So then you talk and you don't know if you're.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. There's challenges with it. We spent an hour, Jason and I spent an hour or more this morning trying to talk about this class, as far as how do you communicate in a way that is, what's the best way to communicate this class via Zoom rather than in person.
Mm-hmm.
So there are challenges still.
Sorry for all the moving around. I'm trying to find a good spot where it stops breaking in and out. I think I got it. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Are you in the Upper Peninsula of Florida? Where are you, Jason?
No, well, we're not far from there. We're in Dauphin Island, Alabama, actually. It's right by Orange Beach, just west of Orange Beach. It's this little tiny island that's about 3 houses wide for about 4 miles. You got ocean on either side of you. It's pretty cool. There's nobody here.
There's nothing down there even on. I mean, I've been there and during tourist season, and there's really nothing down there except beaches, right?
Yep, it's
Kind of
pretty
neat.
Just perfect
Pretty
place to
relaxing.
be.
Yeah. A fox literally just ran in our yard, like there is nothing but sand here, and a fox ran 15 yards from Judah and the little girls. That's what all that screaming was just a second ago.
Well,
Crazy.
before we get this class started, I wanted to let you guys know that if you open the chat option on whatever device you're on, I'm going to post the workbook again, the Excel templates again, and then also the supporting documents there. So I just wanted to make you guys aware that I'm posting those now so you guys can have access to them.
Okay. So if we don't participate in the chat, we're not going to get them, because last time I couldn't find them anywhere. That's why I had to email you and ask you for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the only way through Zoom that you can share documents is through a chat option, but I'll try my best to in follow-ups to try to attach them as well. It's a little harder, or at least I'll attach a link via Dropbox or something too.
If I just type something in chat now, it should all be documented for me.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's there.
Thanks, Jeff.
What's that? I'm actually trying to do it. Price that house I'm working on.
Let me know, guys, if you can't see anything. I'll try to send them to you directly too.
Well, there's a thing at the bottom too. It's stop video, and then it says share content. I don't need to do anything with that then.
No. Mm-mm.
We ready to roll?
Let's do it.
So thanks guys for coming back for part 2. We're really excited about this class. We are excited to see what you guys came up with action items. This is one of the first classes that we've done this year that kind of had some action items to kind of reinforce the pricing strategy. So we're super excited to see what you guys came up with. Before we get into the action items, I wanted to just do a little small recap. So of part 1, for those of you guys who weren't here. So to start the recap, your success as a listing agent depends on the value proposition and having the ability to lead sellers down the path of self-discovery. So remember that typical agents want to focus on marketing rather than their pricing strategy. And so if we can transition that mindset to focus more on having a strategic pricing strategy and not so much marketing, you'll find that it's a lot easier to convert those sellers for you. To utilize a great pricing strategy, agents must have the knowledge conveyed through tools and data, display and have confidence, and have a mindset that goes above and beyond just taking a listing, and care for their clients and their clients' needs. So remember that typical agents lack in these areas and don't do much on a day-to-day to try to get into that mastery level. List price must be less than or equal to value. So if the list price exceeds value, the seller's needs or wants are being, or the seller's needs and wants are being used to justify the price, which will not work because buyers don't typically care about what the seller's needs or wants are. And then to reaffirm the 7-step pricing strategy, step 1 is pulling sold information into your CMA, placing that neighborhood into high, low, and mid ranges. This allows for sellers to identify obvious feature patterns, which leads to step 2 and pulling expired information into your CMA, allowing us to gain an understanding or identify all of the no's in the neighborhood or any expired properties that were priced wrong. Step 3 is based strictly off of features of the home, placing the home on a custom CNA based on the features, and then the features determine the home's range. So whether that's that high, mid, or low. Step 4 is based strictly off of amenities and conditions of the home. Amenities and conditions dictate the home's position within the range established by the features. Step 5 allows you to focus back to the seller's needs to ensure that they are being met, asking questions like, if we were to price your house here, does it meet your needs? Resort to your criteria sheet you used in the listing listing conversion to make sure all needs are being addressed. Most typical agents stop at step 5 also, so remember that. Step 6 is pulling all active information into your CMA. Just because the seller's price can be justified by previously sold and expired homes doesn't mean that the price at which the home should be listed is right there. So competition and market conditions determine the entry point, and thus must be carefully considered before you determine where to enter that market. And then finally, step 7 allows you to address any timing need of the sellers to gain agreement on appropriate price point. If the seller wants a quick sell, the subject home must be priced below all true competitors. And if the seller has no timing need, the home can be priced more aggressively, but still within justification. So did anyone have any good key takeaways from part 1 that maybe you want to talk about before we get into the action items? No?
I can't hold my hand up, but I do want to talk about one thing. I mean, we're going to do this class a little bit differently. We're going to jump right into pricing, but before we, you know, and the 2 scenarios that we laid out, but before we do that, the concept of moving away from presentation and into conversation is a big part about the whole process, I think, that came out of part 1 for me the first time I heard that, and really love that thought.
Just the whole idea of this, I love every part of this. You know, it's given us a 7-step pricing strategy. You know, one of the things that we talk a lot about is setting ourselves apart. Just in the fact of using that language, that you're going to use a 7-step pricing strategy to come up with a price with them is going to set you apart from everybody else. When you can say, you know, you can use that as part of, you know, I've got a 7-step marketing strategy, I've got a 7-step pricing strategy, whatever it is, using that language is going to help you. And again, the whole idea of this is getting them, you're wanting to pull them along. Nobody likes to get pushed, so we want to pull them. We want to get them to self-discover where that price is. And it's not, again, it's not a price, but we're going to talk a lot about a range. And the more difficult the property is to price, that bigger that range needs to be. And so don't feel bad. You know, we put so much pressure on ourselves that we feel like we have to price the home. It's just a poor way of doing it. And it usually gets us in trouble, or potentially can get us in trouble.
Glad you
Kind of, no, go ahead.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, Jason, because it takes the responsibility off the agent, puts it back on the seller, and then it sets up for a better relationship throughout the whole deal. Because it's just, you're going to see as we go through these examples, as we share what we went through in pricing these two fictitious properties, it is tough. Jason, do you want to talk about the steps real quick?
Yeah, that sometimes that can feel a little overwhelming, but really all you have to remember is that you're always going to start with your solds. You want to, clients, sellers are going to want to start with actives. That's the last place we're going to go because those people are still dreaming. If you go back one more, that's the solds are where we want to start. And from there, we want to go to expireds. And actually, we didn't do any expireds today because we know we're going to be a little limited on time. But please do that. Expireds can be a really powerful tool, especially if you use the language that we talked about in the last class, that these are the homes that the market rejected. That's a really strong, powerful thing. And you're going to use those expireds, much like you did the solds, to kind of quantify the sold. You're going to use them to show, yep, you see this house, it was listed, this would have been really on the high range and it didn't sold. The market rejected it. And not until we go through sold, expireds, are we then going to get into actives. And that's usually the opposite of what most people, and it's for sure the opposite of what sellers want to do. So.
Well, and it's the opposite of what they see. They can see actives. They can't see any of the rest of it. And going the opposite direction, starting with expireds, really sets the tone. Just like you said, Jason, it causes them to think differently than the available information to them. I mean, all they've got to do is look at what's on the market.
Mm-hmm.
And so going the opposite way is so powerful.
Yeah, it also shows them how many homes are actually not sold in our market the first time. I mean, it shows how many truly don't get sold. They get relisted sometimes 3 or 4 times. So I don't think people realize it's not a typical market.
Hey, Tracy, you want to say that? Do you think this process can be used for counter negotiations too, used in every process? I'm sure it could, if nothing more, to help someone be realistic. I think that we get clouded sometimes. The clients get clouded on both ends. So I'm sure it could.
Yeah, I would think so. The other thing, I've heard agents complain that this takes a long time, because it does. This isn't something that's easy to do. But again, it goes back to how much, this is one of the most cost, what's the word I'm looking for? Cost effective.
Dollar productive.
Yeah, dollar producing. Yeah, thank you. Dollar producing activities that we do. Besides going to closings, there's nothing else that's more dollar producing than going on a listing. So put some time into these.
Jason, real quick, you used to have a percentage. Do you have any idea of percentage of listed property that actually sells on MLS?
Gosh, we didn't do it this year. We have not done it for 2019, but I know, and it used to be a third. I mean, it was in the
Right.
30%. It was up, at least for residential property, it was up just a hair over 50% in 2018, but we need to run those for 19, I believe.
Yeah, I remember it went from 50% to in the 30s. But the fallout is what they don't expect. So expired information is really good to share. Step 3, we had a lot of Jason and I had a lot of conversation about step 3 and 4. Step 3, based strictly off features of the home. Step 4 says it's based strictly off amenities and conditions of the home. So we talked about what is the difference between features, amenities, and conditions. And we're going to go through that in our pricing scenarios, because that's interesting. That's kind of blurred lines down here sometimes, especially when you have a waterfront home you're talking about. We'll get into that. Step 5 allows you to focus back on sellers' needs, and that gets into how fast do I need to sell? Do you even care if it sells? Why? What's your why? Why are you selling? And that really comes into what price they decide to enter the market at.
Mhm.
And that's where that summary sheet really helps as well. Anything else to add?
I was just going to say that I really enjoy the 7-step order, because if you dissect it and take the time to truly understand it, it takes it from step by step, dissecting it just a little bit more in front of your seller's eyes. So there's that self-discovery is happening with every single step, and it kind of pushes those limitations for those sellers just a little bit more each time. And I think that is also just another great point of how effective it can be, taking those knowledgeable steps in that order.
Kaylin, yesterday, and oftentimes I don't have the chance to go on as many appointments as I used to. Yesterday, I got a random call, and it was a referral. It was a guy that does some work for us, and he called me and he said, hey, I've got this gal that's got a house. It's a really nice home, and I've worked for her before, and I found out she was going to sell it. So I told her that she has to call you, or that you're going to call her. And so he gives me the number, and I call this gal, super nice gal. She's in Kansas City now, is selling her home here at the lake, or going to. And as we talked, she told me that she's already spoke to another agent. And I said, well, tell me a little bit about the process that agent went through with you to educate you on the market and everything that we see. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, did she give you a price? And she said, oh yeah, she did. And I said, well, how did she arrive at that? Were you able to see what she was seeing? I said, because I don't know. I said, but it's really helpful to me to be able to get the information that I am seeing into your hands, so that this is not my decision, it's your decision.
Oh, I like that answer.
I think that this process creates that type of conversation, which can win a interaction. And like it or not, that's the game we're all in. That's the poison we picked. We're interviewing for every deal. Mm-hmm. So it's the little things. That other agent could have went through the exact same process, but the fact that they were not having that conversation with the client might eliminate their ability to list that property and swing it to me. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's really cool. Great example of how that happens all the time. I mean, it does happen all the time.
So I have a couple questions. I know another question. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I love it.
So when I've heard other agents say that when they go into a listing, they don't come in with they have their comps, they have a general idea of what they think it should be listed for, but then they tell the client, well, anybody that comes in and tells you right off the bat that they know what this is worth, they're crazy. I need to go back and run some comps and do this and that. So I've heard several different schools of thought. And so Jeff, when you guys go in, you take the spreadsheet, it's already filled out, and you know what you know in general, you don't know what they're going to price it, but you have that information readily available when you come into that presentation. Is that correct?
So it would be wrong to tell you that every situation is the same, because it's not. Mm-hmm. If a person is willing to sign and I have enough knowledge about the property or the person, and I know that the pricing is right, I'm going to get them to sign immediately.
Mhm.
Right.
If I'm in a cold interview where I don't know you, I don't know your property. I mean, this, my process before any of this was taught, was to come in and I would bond with you. I would learn about your home. I would take a lot of notes. And then I would do exactly what you said. I would say, hey, you know what, if you're interviewing, I hope you are. But if anybody comes in and says they know exactly what your property's worth, I don't believe there's a realtor or an appraiser. I certainly know that I wouldn't do that. I want to go back and I want to do the homework that I need to do on the sold properties, the actives. So please give me the time, Brian, so I can do the right research, the right homework to provide you with the data you need to make the best decision possible. And it worked really well for me because it set those people up that did come in and walk around without any supporting information. It set them up that the people oftentimes thought that's bad. They shouldn't be walking around my house putting their hands in their pocket and telling me, yeah, I think it's about 350. You know what I mean?
Well,
it worked for me.
For me, what I found, I took that advice, and then I noticed that in those situations, like you were talking about, those cold call situations, you don't know the people, you don't know the property, that I felt like I lost more listings that way.
Well,
To me, if you came in and you said, okay, look, here are, I mean, let's face facts. It's pretty easy to find information about a person's house, whether or not you've been in it or not. And to come in with that spreadsheet, to me, it gives you an opportunity to say, look, what do you want to interview another agent? Why? Here's the information right here. What do you want to do? And it adds a little more pressure to them to just say, okay, yeah, we'll just cancel that and we'll just go with you. Whereas when you walk out that door, it's like a car salesman, they always tell you, hey, if they leave the lot, you've lost it. You got to keep them on that lot,
Right.
So
Well,
that's one.
Brian, I want to expand it on that too. Is this series of mastery classes actually, when thinking about pricing boot camp, we try to explain that listing conversion, pricing boot camp, and then objections flow kind of in that order. So when we're in conversion, before we teach this class, we teach about how when you're getting into conversion, you are converting those clients, you're asking all those questions, getting all of that information, building that relationship so that you can set an additional appointment to have this pricing meeting after they've kind of already agreed to work with you. And that way it allows you to get all of kind of that homework done, but the relationship itself is already kind of pre-established. But like Jeff was saying, every situation can be different as far as kind of where all of those things fall.
But to Brian's point, if you can get the information, we need to get it. It's just that some of the houses down here are, you're going to see from our little fictitious game we're going to play in a minute, it does get crazy. So should we move right on to the first example?
Yep.
Jason, you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay. So I made this up. It was a condo. And when I did it for, first reason was I wanted something that would be relatively easy, and condominiums are like their own little city. Yours and mine, if we live side by side, they're the same square footage. They have the same basic bedrooms and baths, and it's just kind of, they fit in a neat little box. We have our same swimming pool, and although we might have some variables, we don't have as many. So we thought this would be a great way to start. You can kind of see there the description of this. What was interesting is I did a little bit of homework before I made it up, but not a lot. So any questions about this fictitious property first? Okay. Let's see what our sold summary pages show us. And Jason, you want to start out with this?
Sure. Whoa, that's a little. Okay. So if you look here, We've got just on all the, and if this is the first time you're looking at one of these summary sheets, it's going to be a little bit confusing. So let me just give you a broad generalization of it. You see right there, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, or the hot, they say high on them. The next 2 are mid, or the next 3 are mid, then the next 3 are low. Sometimes you may have 4 in all of them. Sometimes you may have 3. Sometimes you're going to struggle to find 1 in any of them. It's just the nature of the beast here at Lake of the Ozarks. If you go to all the other categories, you've got, we were able to pull on our sold comps, everything that was in the ledges. And that's in a condo project, obviously, if we have a lot to choose from, that's what we want to choose from, obviously, right, is the actual condo project. Then, as Jeff said, there's not a lot of differences. The amenities tend to be the exact same. You know, I have pools. Sometimes there's garages that may be at different amenities. The boat slip. Usually they have a boat slip, but sometimes, you know, they vary on the sizes. Sometimes furnishings. You know, we talked a little bit about that in the first price. Do you include furnishings in the value? Do you not? We'll get into that. The building location. We talked about whether it was cove or main channel view. And usually main channel views are a little bit more valued, but it also kind of depends on boat dock positioning as well. There's a lot of different variables. And probably the biggest one that I didn't talk about was, you know, is it walk-in, is it lower, or is it, you know, top floor? And each one of those has kind of its own value. Some people only want walk-in. Some people only want top floor. You'll find fewer people want something that's lower where they can walk out. Usually that is not desirable. So that just kind of gives you an overall summary of sold condos. What you're going to find in all of the summary sheets, just kind of again broad and general, is sometimes there may be things that you want to add or take away as far as the columns go. There may be something that we need to add, and you'll really see that when we get to the lakefront home. But as far as condos, they're a little bit easier to gauge. Anything you want to add to that, Jeff?
The only thing I want to add is the idea is to take your unit and the pluses and minuses and then create the columns that you need. So for instance, proximity of boat slip to the unit. Literally right before our call, I was talking with one of our agents and he was talking about this unit he's listing now. And we got to talking and I said, wait a second, I know that project. Where's the dock? And he goes, well, actually the dock's about as far away from the unit as possible. I said, that's going to affect your value. I mean, people have to walk a long way to that particular slip. And even though it's a nice slip, that has been a deterrent for some of the listings within there. So
you're never going to see that on an appraisal sheet.
No. And you're going to know, I mean, you're going to learn. I guess we all learn. We don't know all the time, but if you do know something that is going to affect positively or negatively based upon the comparables, we need to create a column to associate that with. So we don't want to indicate that this summary sheet is the all-knowing, all-being, you know what I mean? Each one of them has to be different for you, and you can make it work. Tracy asked a question about comparing assessments. We've had that particular conversation about specific projects a lot, and yet I didn't put it on here. I should have, because that's a big deal, especially if you're forced to compare with other projects. This one, you know, you can see every one of my comps, every one of our comps we pulled, same project. That's not the case all the time. Lots of times there's a whole bunch of different projects. I personally feel like if you can compare within your project, you stay within your project. If you can't, you don't, you know, you go outside of it. And you'll see on actives, we had to go outside of it.
You guys pulled more than I did. I only went back like, how far do y'all go back? Are we still going back like a year, 6 months? What are we doing?
So I don't ever go back more than a year if I can't. And I specifically used a bunch on this and Jason and I talked about it, you have the ability as an agent to cut this down to whatever you feel that you need to. But also from a self-discovery standpoint, it's really nice, in my opinion, for sellers to see the anomalies that got more than they should, and the super motivated people that actually hurt everybody else's value because they took less than they should. I mean, I think that there's value in both of that if you have the ability to communicate it to the seller.
Yes.
With the
Good question.
yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I was just reading the things with the Corona prices maybe all over the place now. We don't know what we don't know yet, so we'll face that whenever we kind of get to it over the next couple months. So the way that we arranged it, as you can see, is we didn't necessarily go by sold price as being the highest. We categorized it as price per square foot. And oftentimes we can get a little bit caught up on price per square foot, but you got to use something that's a starting point. And with condos, especially if they're all in the same project, that's a really good place to start. You can see we had a ton to pull from. One of the things that we did was, this had a garage, correct, Jeff? But we decided to leave it out at this point and negotiate it.
Yes, we actually decided to price that separately. You know, and you'll find that scenario a lot with people that have multiple slips, with people that have garages. And my opinion is to keep them in a comparable price range if possible, as long as it's something that they can sell it, but not until that unit sells. Because there was not a lot of units that had a garage available. There was only 2 in the that had garages that could even be sold separately listed.
Jeff, can you kind of explain kind of the conversational points as you were to have a seller kind of in front of this sheet right now?
Absolutely. Yeah, so you've got your fictitious property, which everybody can see are that you can read what that property looks like. And my goal then is to give them an idea of what has sold at the highest within their project and why, and what has sold at the lower level and why, and compare that, and then ask them, where, based upon what we have, do you feel like yours fits in? And I give them some suggestions about that. I don't allow that to be completely their input. But if I can orchestrate that, you know, in this one in particular, I would tell them, in my opinion, that falls between 612 and 623. Their unit does. It would be the top of the mid and the low of the high. So my opinion on their unit is that the range on their unit is probably a low of 150,000 to a high of 160,000. And remember, first, we're talking about solds. Solds have proven their value because they actually sold. Somebody actually looked, got interested enough to make an offer, and got to an acceptable price that closed. That means it appraised and it got all the way to close. And yes, Tracy, this is for a 3 to 6 month seller. So I was trying to give them a realistic idea of price range. And we'll show you when we jump to actives how the reason we wanted to be a little bit flexible with that price range.
We won't really know. This isn't really giving us our time frame yet. We're just kind of seeing the range at this point.
Mhm.
We want to make sure that we're not being ridiculous either one way or the other. And then the expireds will kind of confirm that is the case. And then once we get into actives, that'll really that's where the time frame comes into place. Because if you got a bunch of actives, you know, and you're deciding you want to be on the high side, which potentially could be okay, but again, it comes down to time frame, and we'll get into that once we get to the actives. But
Yeah. Do you want me to flip through some of these summary pages?
we provided the actual MLS sheets behind these, this summary, and we always take that with us. We don't go through it because we don't want to confuse the sellers. We work off the summary, but if there's a specific question or challenge about a unit that brought X, then we have the documentation behind it. And I would even take ones with pictures if I needed it, because if I needed to demonstrate the finish work in one of them was the reason it brought a lot more, I would have that with me. And I didn't put that on this one, but I think it's always good. I think you're okay to move on through these, but you guys can see that they're here. Any questions about the sold summary page or that part of the process?
Those are also included in the attachments that I gave you guys as well.
Hey,
That's what I meant
Gary,
by summary sheet.
Go back to the sold just super quick.
Yep.
Just real quick. Does everybody understand why Jeff was saying it would probably be somewhere between the mid and the high? Like this is a lower unit. And so of the lower units, there's none that sold over that 153 mark, 153 per square foot. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Because we know that walk-ins, we know that up from parking are more desirable. And so just the fact of it being a lower, considering everything else is pretty dang similar, that's probably going to be one of the main determining factors as far as this property is and where it's priced. Would you agree, Jeff?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, that was one of the biggest things.
As you can see, the dock slips are comparable. Everything else is pretty comparable.
Anything else with the solds?
Any questions on those?
So we
Okay,
made it.
so the next part, what we should do is do the exact same thing with expireds. And again, the expireds are allowing us to show what the market rejected. And we want to be able to use those to kind of prove our point on the active or of what sold. What typically you're going to see on those expired are things that were listed too high. They're listed too high, they didn't sell. You're able to compare those side by side with the sold sheet, and it's just more ammunition and just being able to use that. But we, just because of lack of time, we didn't want to put the expireds, but the expireds, don't skip that step.
So
the
just
actives.
yeah, just a couple things on the actives. You'll see the very first one is contingent. You do want to search pending and contingent. Now, I've seen people put pending and contingent on sold sheets. I prefer to put it on the active sheet. This is one of them that was out there. Actives are not proven. Tracy's talking, but I can't hear. I think Tracy's got a question. Nope. Okay, so this first one is contingent. It also happens to be the only Ledges active comparable. Now it's under contract, but it's the only one that was in the Ledges. After that, I was forced to go outside. We were forced to go outside of the Ledges project and compare what buyers would see in other projects. And so I have to, we have to explain not only that active properties are not proven yet. They're the kind of the dreamers of the bunch. They've got it on the market, but we don't know if people are going to be compelled enough to write a contract, and we don't know if they will appraise for that value yet. They're not as proven. But these are what a buyer would see in today's market, and it's worth consideration of how you fit in. This is why we were flexible with this, because you'll see that there's a real gap in the active comparables between 140. It jumps from 140,000 to 172,000 and there's nothing listed in Ledges. So that realistically, these sellers have a little bit of control. I mean, they can push a little bit if they want to. Does that make sense?
And the other thing I would say is sometimes what I'll do too is even if there's like a 3-2 that's in the Ledges, I may put that down as at the bottom just to show them that, because there's a good chance they're going to know what else is for sale in there, and they might not realize that that house or that condo is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And so even though it's not a true comp because it doesn't have the same features that ours does, or it's, there's a big difference between a 3 and a 2-bedroom. Putting that on there just so they can kind of see it allows them to, but don't make it part of the actual. I'd be real hesitant to put a 3-bedroom, 2-bath compared to a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Would you agree, Jeff? You're better off going outside typically.
I think so. If you're comparing apples to apples, I think there's a real difference in 3 to 2. I think I would agree that you should have the information. And Trish just said, yeah, and yes, I agree. Trish said, since nothing else is for sale in the Ledges, you could go higher, supply and demand. That's exactly what I was getting at as far as why we established a pretty generous range based upon the solds, because we already knew that actives, from an active standpoint, these sellers would be a little bit in control. So, that's a great place to be for a seller, and it's a great place to be for an agent as long as their motivation matches. Because there's a little bit of uncertainty.
So I want to ask you guys, as you guys look at this information, where do you guys see the range of this condo coming in after you look at the actives, knowing that somebody wants to sell in the next 3 to 6 months? Anybody got any ideas?
I put it 150 to 160, and I kind of put it at 156.8. I put it kind of right in the middle at 160 a foot. So
I put it at 157,309. I can't remember what price per square foot, but that's what I came up with.
Anybody else?
Dog ate my homework. I don't know.
Trish said 160-ish.
Yeah, I don't think you're out of bounds at 160-ish.
So would you encourage in this situation, since you know that a 980 square foot condo at Ledges, it's hard to just find comps on it because they're selling so quick. Would you encourage them to list closer to 160 or 150? I guess that would boil down to what their needs were, though, right?
Exactly. This is the time, if you've got somebody who's really pushing you to push the market, as long as you are communicating to them, here's where the numbers put it, but I'm totally okay if you are trying to set the market. That's the language I use. If you want to set the market, then I'm okay with that. As long as you are, the numbers don't support it. And you'll see in our waterfront home that we do that happens a lot when you get a general topography. But even on a condo like this, where there's nothing that you're really competing against, as long as they understand the numbers put it closer to here, I'm okay trying to push it if you are. I just don't want you to get discouraged if it doesn't sell right away. That's the language I use.
Well, and like it or not, we're in a want, not a need market. That's something we've got to be flexible enough to deal with, and we've got to be willing. And what I like about this summary is it gives us the ability to have some real conversation around that. Like, for instance, to Trish's point, if they went up into the 160s, let's say they went into the high 160s, you can say, I think that would put us in up towards the top of the height. And what that's going to do, you got to remember our market's changing. So as other properties come on the market, we have to remember we could cause some other properties to sell. But as long as you guys are okay with that, not being, you know, if our price causes other properties to sell, not being upset by that, I'm willing to try it. You know, if we need to sell within 3 months, my suggestion is you stay below that 160. But if you want to try it, I'm willing to try it with you. You know, it takes you off the hook, and it gives you some ammunition to go back to whenever they forget that they were the ones that priced this with you, and they will forget. If you don't sell it in 3 months, they're going to be like, well, you know, I don't understand why we price that so high, or why you price that so high. And then you can say, well, now wait a second. Remember when we were looking at this summary and we talked about this? So it gives you some way to bring that conversation back to, hey, we were, you know, we were together on this. Everybody okay with that?
Jeff, I was gonna have you expand on the garage too in the example.
Well, you know, the garage, I should have qualified the garage a little differently than I did. For those, you know, for anybody who doesn't, most of you all on here probably know this already, but garages are usually very easy to sell within a project. There's not very many of them. There's people in line to buy them. So that means that a garage can be sold to the person who wants the condo at additional dollars, or it can be sold to somebody else. I prefer to keep our pricing standard with everybody else. If the majority doesn't include a garage, I don't want to include a garage. I want to get the extra out of it. It's kind of like an additional slip.
Leverage.
Is everybody with that? Is that okay?
Did
Typically,
anybody
the
else?
higher price you go, you're going to end up, you're going to miss some people. If you were to add another 15,000, you might miss some people who are searching by price point, because all of a sudden you're up in that 175 price point. When
It's a
whereas
market.
this way,
It's a marketing strategy. Just because they have it,
yeah,
does not mean you want to include it. It might
Were
cause you to
saying
miss
the
people.
Garages are typically 15,000 in value. I'm unfamiliar with the condos,
So in this case, I found two on the comps, and we can see when we go back through the supporting data, one is listed actually, garage can be purchased for 7,500. I agree with you, Rhonda. More often we see them at $15,000 to $25,000 to $30,000, but at the ledges, I think the age and the sizes of the garage could make them less. Does that make sense?
makes sense.
it's pretty easy to find out the value of the garages on most of those places. They're pretty set if you make a few phone calls.
Okay.
Does anybody have anything else as far as the condo example?
One
You
more
can
thing.
see that just as easy as these condos are, there's still a lot of little variables.
Mhm.
There are. To Brian's point earlier, that I think is really important. If you can put this stuff together, and you can on condos before you ever go there, on most of them you can do it. And if you can put it together and get it signed, Brian, I totally agree that that's the way to go. But as you'll see on the next example, I didn't realize I was going to cause the conversation and the challenges that I did. But oftentimes on our waterfront homes, there's just no way to do it. There is too many variables, too many differences. So if we're okay, let's jump into that, because we are taking a lot of time already, and I knew we would.
That's okay.
But I think these conversations are really, I hope that you guys find them helpful. So here's our waterfront example. This is I wanted to purposely
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
real quick, Trish said, besides updates, do you think age of building comes into play? Just before we get into the.
I would say yes, Trish, it does. It really depends on the actual project. Like you go out to, oh shoot, I live there, I forget.
Regent.
Where?
Regency.
No, not Regis. Towards the end of HH on the left. It's got. Oh my gosh, it's a huge complex.
Regatta
past
Bay.
Regatta Bay. So Regatta Bay, even the buildings have a tremendous difference in the value of the units. You can have 3-bedroom, 2-bath condos, and you'll see if you keep going out on the point, there could be a difference of $120,000 in those, and maybe some of them are a little bit bigger, but it's not the price per square foot. It's going up more than incrementally, if that makes sense. So the age of the building, the location of the building, even though it's a condo, a lot of different complexes have kind of their own little things that shoot up the value.
Like in
But yeah,
Regatta,
age of building for sure. But again, I think each complex, I don't know how you, there's no quantify, and that's what we're going to get into in this is it's really hard to find a quantifiable. It's hard to find, well, if it's 5 years older, it's worth 3% less, or in a house, it's, the topographies, the grade is at a 10% grade, it's worth this much more than one that's at a 18% grade. I mean, those things just are hard to quantify. I hate to say it, but sometimes it's a gut feeling. When you say, Jeff?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because I actually picked building 6 in Ledges because it is a
older
good
building.
building. Yeah, it. So that was a good question. Okay, so this waterfront example, I thought that this would be an easy thing, and I realized after reading it back and starting the homework on it that I should have been much more specific. Gentle topography, for instance, Jason pinned me when we were talking about it. He said, what does gentle mean? Gentle could mean, 40 steps, or it could mean 2 steps. And I said, well, in my opinion, it was like 15 steps. I was talking gentle now, really gentle, because that makes a lot of difference. Gentle driveway makes a lot of difference. And so I wanted to create a great property in a great area and demonstrate how much that means in pricing. This is 6 Mile Cove. This is inside the cove, not in the back of the cove, in a really nice part of the cove. They do want to sell realistically. The property is only 10 years old for a single family home. That's not a lot. They have deep water. They've got a nice dock. I mean, this is one of those special homes that we would all love to list. So it's a challenge. So let's start with the solds. You're going to see notes on both the comps and the front here. Before we talk about this, we just wanted you to know that there are columns that need to be added for every situation. Some columns that could have been added onto this summary sheet would have been topography. Dock envelope would be a great column. Dock value would be a great column. I mean, there are some serious swings in value based upon those 3 things. Do you want to add to that, Jason?
Well, I just say, as we talk about waterfront and dock envelope, they're not the exact same thing. You can have a 100-foot lakefront lot and a bad dock envelope, or you could have one that has 80 feet and has a great dock envelope. So the 80-foot lot is actually worth more than the 100-foot lot. But you talk to an appraiser and they're not going to, they're typically, hey, it's this much, they're going to give a value of this much per linear foot. That's not the way it works in the real world. So is there much difference in a 110-foot and 130-foot? Probably not. You're just not going to get, are you going to get a little bit more? Possibly. Is it worth $5,000 or $10,000 more? But is it worth $2,000 a foot more? No. I just don't think you're gonna get that on the value of a home. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
If anybody doesn't understand dock envelope, Okay, okay, we've got a question
I
about
don't
that.
understand dock envelope. Yeah,
Okay,
explain it, please.
Oh, yeah.
yes, so we have let's say we have 200-foot lots. One of the lots is 80 foot on the road and 100 foot on the lake. The other is 150 foot on the road and 100 on the lake. Can you
Sounds
imagine
like it'd
how,
be better.
what?
It sounds like it'd be better to have the big one on the road.
Amen. But
Sorry,
now,
I couldn't interrupt.
now draw that line. Start with 80 foot and go to 100, and you see how you're pieing this way. Now start with 150 foot on the road and go to 100. See how I'm pieing this way? What the way those extended property lines go into the water create your room for your dock, which we're calling a dock envelope. If I can put a 3-well dock on my 100 foot and you know, my neighbor can only put a 1-well dock on his 100 foot, even though we have the same footage, it's going to be worth a ton of difference in dollars. And appraisers like to put a value per foot on lots. Consumers like to call you and say, well, come on, you know, come on, Jeff, can't you give me an idea what this is worth per foot? Well, no, I can't give you that. And no, Tracy just asked if envelopes are anywhere on MLS. Sometimes you can look up a plat map, but and see, I mean, not sometimes, you always can look up GIS and kind of get an idea of what that is, but we don't have a spot for it. It's just based upon what is able to be permitted.
Here's the other thing that makes it really tricky is typically the more expensive the property, the more it's going to affect value, the more it's going to affect your dollar amount if it has a bad dock envelope. It may not affect it tremendously if you're selling a $250,000 lakefront home. But if you're trying to sell $1 million home, those people don't want a 1-well dock. They don't want a small dock envelope. They've got big boats. They want to be able to put a big boat dock where they're at. And so those things can really affect value more so with a higher price. Same goes for water depth. It affects the higher end homes more so than the really low end. Would you agree? Anybody disagree with that? Everybody understand why?
You know, the dock value, going on to your next one about the dock itself, I just was by side of one in 6 Mile Cove earlier this year where the owner thought the dock was worth $75,000, where it came out the dock was crap, literally was falling apart. So we had a $600,000 house, 650, and the seller thought, well, the dock's worth another 70, you know, as part of that. And it's like, no, it's going to cost these people. They got rid of it, but they almost had to pay money to have it hauled off. It was so bad. And there's always a big disconnect between a buyer's value that dock and what sellers think it's worth, right? Because, oh, well, I've got $70,000. Well, maybe you overpaid for that dock, or the dock's been beat to death for the last 10 years and it's not in good condition anymore. You know what I'm saying? And it was a big sticking point on this deal. We finally got it closed, but it really, we had to get Dock Realty involved and different opinions of the dock and what it was worth.
So you had somebody come out and appraise it?
Well, yeah, David Dock Realty charges $150 to do. I wish I could get $150 for every appraisal I did or value. We had some dock builders say it was salvageable. We had some say it was junk. It needed to be hauled off. At the end of the day, we were able to put it together. They ended up, Dock Realty, because he needs inventory, he ended up getting $10,000 out of it. It was a huge dock, but it wasn't galvanized. It was painted. And it was really old and had rusted. And so, you know, it was a big sticking point on, the buyer and seller were so far apart on the value of that dock that we weren't, Jane, and it was Jane's client, I was handling the buy side, but they were so far apart on what they thought the dock was valued at. And the buyer thought he was going to have a liability and have to get it hauled out. So, I mean, on lakefront, this is, and you're talking about a $650,000 sale, you know?
Yeah, docks can be all over. I mean, you can have a $150,000 dock, you can have a $5,000 dock. I mean, those are things that need to be considered.
Well, in this
But those
case-
are things that are tangible. Those are things that you can go out and get an appraisal on. The doc envelope is something that's much harder. The topography is something that's much harder.
Right.
It's
Well, in this case, there was so many, we had 5 different opinions and they were all over the board. So,
right.
normally you say, yeah, that doc's X and it can be sold for X, but we had one guy say it's junk, it needs to be hauled off, and but yeah, it's very
He
subjective.
was
like you
willing
said.
to do it for you for free.
Tracy, did you
That's a
get your
good point.
question answered about how they are certified?
What did you mean by certified? Sorry.
There, I've unmuted. So, I mean, we're realtors, so we went through a licensing process. Do they go through a licensing process? Doc Realty, do they go through a licensing process?
Not that I know of. In this case, the dock had to be re-permitted because it had been added onto. And what's the engineer? I'll think of his name. I had an engineering report where he did do a survey of it to make sure it was seaworthy or whatever they call it. But no, I mean, as far as I know, you guys, Jeff, Jason, I don't know if Dave at Dock Realty, there's no certification to go through to be a certified dock dealer, right?
No, not that I know of, but there, he's pretty valuable, or he's pretty knowledgeable because he handles all those used dock sales. And I mean, we know what, that creates value in itself. So, but I don't think there's any certification. Mm-mm.
No. And again, like Dave said on the dock builders, we had several dock builders look at, well, of course they want to sell a new dock.
True.
Yeah, that dock's crap. You need to buy a new one.
So the bottom line is dock value would have been a great column. I wished I'd have put it on here, but I just put a dock column. So when we look at summary of solds, we know that this is one of those properties that is inherently going to bring more because of where it is and what it has to offer, the general topography, the size, the area by road and water. So we know that already. We want to make sure that we are looking for sold properties that actually fit that bill. There was at least probably 6 or 8 other sold properties, and the higher the price and the more unique the property, the more it's going to be important that if you don't have some basis of the knowledge, you leverage your other agents and talk to them. I went to Mel and I said, Mel, look at these properties for me, qualify them, and you'll actually see some of her notes on some of the sheets that helped me. She was able to show them to me. So I've checked the comps, and I think that's really important to do when you get into these price ranges, because remember what Jason said, the higher the price, the larger the range you're going to give a client, the less you're going to hone in on one number, and the bigger the range. We decided that we felt like this property was in a range of from anywhere from $799 to $899. That's $100,000 swing. But when we're talking to people, when we're talking to a seller, we're going to give them that swing, and we're going to start by going over all these comps. And the first thing I would tell them is see this Cascade Court, focus in on the 150 feet of waterfront. This was an exceptional lot, and that created what we call a little bit of a market anomaly. $293 a square foot is not the norm. And then I would also tell them that, in my opinion, the Gary Court is the closest sold comp to what they have, because it is. It's similar in square footage. It's similar in baths and bedrooms. It is an older home, but it was in great shape. Has a similar dock, similar waterfront. It's the closest comp that we had in our list. So I would go through these individually with them all the way through, and then look at my price per square foot range. What questions does that stir up, or does that make sense? I wish there was a scientific way to quantify this, but there's not. We beat this back and forth for an hour before we got on this call. Can you add to that, Jason?
Well, I just say there's going to be when you're talking about flat lots and you're talking about lakefront homes in this price point, or even things that are more expensive, there's going to be anomalies out there. And you talked about it a little bit on Cascade Court. And so I think it's important to discuss those anomalies. You don't want to ignore them, but you discuss them. And then, you know, if they're in a house that potentially could have an anomaly, if it's an exceptionally flat lot and they're really wanting to push the price, I'd be real hesitant to give that listing up. You know, and again, it would go back to, here's what the market is telling us. The market is telling us that the range is here, but if you're wanting to push, you know, 950, I don't know that I would necessarily give up the listing for
I
that.
wouldn't.
As long as they understood the market tells us it's here. I'm not going to promise you that I can sell your house if we list it at 950. But I know the range. I know if we get in that range, I know at 799 I can sell it for sure.
So
The numbers are pushing it. You know, the numbers being pushed show it at 899. But you're wanting to list at 950. I just, on a flat lot in 6 Mile Cove, in a cove, I'm just not probably giving that up. You know, if he wanted to list it at 1.3, I'm not going to take that. But
So Brian, this is where I swing the opposite way from our conversation earlier. And I emphasize so much the inability for any agent or appraiser to price property based on all the things. And when you go in with a sheet like this, you allow flexibility, and I can get that. I won't lose because somebody else just said they were 20,000 higher than me. Because I can move and I can be flexible with that. And I think it's important that we recognize that. I can't tell you the amount of examples where I've seen really, really good agents get caught within their own feeling that they know the exact price, and they have good intentions, but they lose listings that turn around and sell for 50,000 more than they thought they should bring. So, I mean, it's a challenge. But I'm glad you said that, Jason.
So I have another question on the comps that you pulled. I don't have one of those comps on my sheet. So when you went in looking for comps on this, maybe I'm totally off base here, but I basically went into Four Seasons Lake Ozark and then, added in rooms. Didn't really focus that much on year built because a lot of the older houses have been remodeled anyways. What else did you focus on to come up? Because I mean, your whole list, I don't have a one of those. I don't think.
So
topography was a big one.
So topography was a big one.
So can I stop you there on the topography? So what you were looking at was, okay, how much road frontage and how much lake frontage?
No.
How
do you search that on our MLS?
You can't. You just got to know the properties.
But that's what the challenge is, because I had a whole list. I had one that was twice this long too, and I didn't know them either. I had to go to Mel because she knew them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
On lakefront, there is nothing that affects value more than topography, other than maybe if it's main channel or cove. We're seeing main channel being dramatically discount homes, even on gentle lots. If you have a cove protection with a gentle lot, it just is bringing top dollar. It has for a while, but it's over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's just they are going for top dollar, more so than even new construction.
So specifically on topography, what exactly are you looking for? I mean, we all know that a steep driveway nobody wants 1,000 steps down to the lake, but is that really what you're looking for? The only thing, or?
Well, I mean, they're all within a certain amount of square footage, as you can see. There's that low mark, that 4,700 is kind of an outlier, but everything else has got very similar square footage. The bedrooms and bathrooms are not exact, but they're very close. But again, it's really weird. The topography, we are looking for things that have a gentle drive and not very many steps down to the lake that are co-protected.
Okay.
So Brian, on the, after this sheet, you'll see the actual comps. And that was a challenge for me as well. So you'll be able to see what was picked.
Hey, Brian.
I go outside of my own rules when you have this special of a house, and I'll even go back further than normal. You know, normal if it's a cookie cutter house and there's nothing that is going to exceptionally increase or decrease the value, you know, you can stay within a 6-month period of time if the market is active enough. But when it's an exceptional lot or an exceptional home, I'll go longer to find a closer match.
Jeff, before we skip through those MLS sheets, can you again, just because we probably won't have enough time to get to dialogue, just kind of explain some dialogue in this step of the sold waterfront and kind of how you explain this to a client, maybe the differences in topography, if you mentioned dock envelopes, just kind of how that conversation goes.
Well, it starts with the explanation of what house sold for what, for what amount of money. And it goes from low to high there. And as you're explaining that, you're going to relate that to their property. And after you're done looking or explaining this sheet, whether it has 3 on it or 10 on it, then your question to them is, okay, now based upon what we have here with your home, where do you think you fit within the values demonstrated here by the properties that have sold? And then we get them talking about where they should fit within this. You know, well, you know, based upon this, I think we should be at least 900. They're going to tell you a lot about themselves and about their pre-existing ideas of value. And most all of them have a pre-existing idea of what that property's worth. And it's usually based upon actives, not sold, because they can only see what's active, really.
Now, Jeff, just to clarify, as they're giving you those expectations in a conversation, are you then utilizing things that they bring up to explain the dock envelopes and what's happening in the market and topography and different things as they are giving you that information?
Yes. And, you know, we also talk about the fact that amenities affect value more often with homes. You know, an amenity to a lakefront home for me might be a dock, okay? And a really nice dock versus a one well old dock is going to affect value significantly. 2 or 3, you know, 2 big boat hoists that have, and 2 PWC hoists may have an impact on value. A real gentle lot will be an amenity to me over a moderate lot that has 50 stairs. And all those things are different, but that is the time when those conversations come up. Anybody want to add to that?
Thank you.
I think, Jeff, you hit it. I mean, especially in this price range, those buyers are going to have a big boat more than likely they're going to have 2 or 3 boats. And it's a big deal. I mean, the dock and what kind of dock they can put on that house in front of the house is, whether it's there or not, they need the capability to have that big a dock, you know?
Yeah. Yes. And Kaylin, to explain it, it's a conversation. And it's almost like a negotiation at this point. But this summary sheet gives us something to negotiate after, because it's their decision of where they're going to enter the market.
Mm-hmm.
And I go in super confidently. I'll tell them, I'll say, you know, one thing that we've got figured out that you don't have to worry about, we will expose your property to every buyer that is coming down here that is going to buy one of these houses. That is not an issue. We have that part figured out. What we don't have nailed down is exactly how the market's going to accept your home based upon the price that we enter at.
Right.
And that is where that conversation, where we're talking about all these different comps and what sold, I just want them to get to talk about where they're going to slide in there. And I want them to slide in there close to Gary Court, but they might want to be close to Cascade, but it at least gives us a chance to talk, to bounce that back and forth.
Shibi asked if we ever used, the asking price versus list price percentage, and absolutely. I think those are great conversations to have, especially if you've got somebody they want to list unrealistically high. I just want an offer. There's a misconception out there that if I list it high, I can always come down and they think everybody's going to lowball them. The reality is one of the conversations you need to be having is kind of going back to what we talked a little bit earlier about the garages. If we list it, we're missing all these buyers. There's different price points that people are looking at. If you're talking about $200,000 condo, if you're talking about a $200,000 price points, I think people typically look in about $25,000 increments. So many of the searches are online searches. So if you're pricing it unrealistically high, you're going to be missing the people who are looking in that $25,000 increment. Once you get to these bigger homes in this price point, it jumps certainly to $50,000, maybe to $100,000 increments. And so, a great line to use is if you're looking for negotiation is what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
But if you price it correctly, it's going to give us leverage. And if I have leverage, then I can get the most money out of your property that we can get. The second I lose leverage is the second I lose the ability to keep your money in your pocket. Something like that.
Well, and then also addressing how having it priced correctly can generate multiple offers too. That's something that we talked about in part 1 as well. So make sure that you can incorporate something like that should the situation call for it.
It absolutely might have, Brian. It might have sold sooner. It might have even got multiple offers. Ethan just had a home that came up in Kellysport Cove on the other side. It was about like this. It was about a 3,300 square foot home on a gentle lot, 3-car garage. It was a little dated. It didn't look great on the inside, but had good bones, cove protection. We kicked around the idea. They wanted to list it like $650. We felt like the number was closer to $700. We thought maybe you might even be able to push $750. They wanted to sell it quickly. We listed it at $699, got multiple offers, and ended up selling it for $725 because we had multiple offers. Goes back to what Kaylin said, because we had leverage, we ended up getting an extra $25,000 or $35,000. I can't remember the exact number, but ended up getting almost $100,000 more than what their needs were, what they were really looking to get, because we had leverage.
Mm-hmm. Which in turn can satisfy more needs as well, just because it was priced kind of more appropriately.
Yeah, let me tell you, it's easier to talk about than it is to get them to understand that here at Lake of the Ozarks, because a lot of people want to sell, but they don't need to sell, and those are the animals that are hard to control. But Brian, to your point, you have to have those tools in your pocket, and you have to be familiar enough with them so that you can use them when needed. And that's the challenge. It's like you're sparring with really educated sellers when you're pricing like this. But there's a lot of good scripts about that we won't get to today. I know we won't get to. But
hey, one of the things I wanted to bring up real quick, Jeff, was there's another weird anomaly that happens. We're in the really sweet spot right here, talking about the 3,200 square foot, and we're talking about price per square foot a lot. There's something that happens. If this house was a 5,000 square foot house on the same lot, I don't think there's any way you're going to, it's unlikely that you're going to get the same price per square foot. There's a sweet spot in the market where you're still hitting lots of buyers and sellers in that 700 to 800 mark. 700 to 900 mark. But all of a sudden, if you've got a 4,000 square foot home, I don't know that you're going to get the same price per square foot more.
Well, look at 1133 Cornet Branch,
Right,
4,700. Your price per square foot's dropped down below 200. So you're exactly right. It's hard to maintain that.
And as much
So-
as I hate to say it, some of this just comes with experience and understand, there is no exact formula when you're talking about topography and you're talking about dock envelope. It just comes with, I feel like, experience and understanding the market and getting out there, seeing homes, understanding, and sometimes there's just homes that sell and they surprise you, and there's homes that you feel like should sell and they don't.
But
And this is one of the most difficult things we do in our market.
I would add to that, then that makes it more worthwhile and more necessary to take the time that you need to do the homework, have the supporting documentation, and leverage some of your other realtors to be as prepared as possible, because none of us get too many at-bats at these types of listings, but we do not want to go in unprepared. And I venture to say that most of the people that you'll compete with will be unprepared. So, go in with your guns loaded, I guess is what I would say.
Well, and I want to piggyback that point too with just something else that typical agents tend to forget from part one, and that is, use it as an educational conversation points too. I mean, people don't know what they don't know, especially clients. So being able to really dig deep into some of these definitions or how you process that summary page can really show value to people who don't understand.
Kaylin, an inexperienced or limited experienced agent can win over a super experienced, super qualified agent just by their preparation.
Yep.
These people want to know that you take it serious. They really do.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you said that. Jason, talk for a while.
All right. So here we've got the active waterfront summary. Again, we would probably go into expireds. I would encourage you to go into the expireds, but just for time's sake, we're going to just kind of look at the actives. It's amazing. It's the same thing with the condos, and it's the same thing if you understand our market. There's just not near as many actives. And so we went with 2 high, 2 milds, or 2 mids and a low. And you can see they're kind of all over the place. We've got a brand new build on Sweetwater. If you look at these, as far as topography, we just couldn't find the same type of comps that we could on the solds. And that just goes back to the fact that those ones with topography, they sell much quicker. That one on 809 Sweetwater is a beautiful home that Coopers have. It's absolutely gorgeous. If that thing was sitting on that same lot that our primary home is sitting, that our subject home is sitting on, you're probably looking at over $1 million. I mean, you're certainly looking over $1 million home would be my guess. But again, we just couldn't find any that had the same type of topography. Would you agree with that, Jeff?
Yes, and can I point out something? On the actives, look at the price per square foot. And remember that when we talked about our range, $799 to $900, or to $900, $799 or $800,000 at $3,200 is $250 a square. Our actives are showing us much less money. This is where if we just looked at actives, we could leave money on the table for someone, because that house will likely bring more per square foot than any of these actives represent,
That's a really great point.
because there's just no actives out there that compare.
Did you guys get similar things on your active sheets or?
No.
What'd you get, Brian?
I don't know. I must be screwing this whole thing up because I did not pull one of the same actives that you did. I went basically with houses that were in a range between 2,800 square foot and 3,400 square foot because of what you were talking about with the anomaly of the price per square foot on a property. You know, the bigger the house for whatever reason, the less you're going to get per square foot. Yes, there are other factors like, you know, what price point is it in, but and so, you know, I was coming up with just went off an average of the actives that I pulled with an average price per square foot of 220 per square foot, which I don't know, using your comps.
Now, your actives might be more accurate. I think the example is there's a lot we can use, and this is a good example of how it can be manipulated or how it can be changed. I like the fact that you stayed within your square footage if you could, or that you did. So this is an example of how much fluctuation there is. 220 per square foot is probably still light compared to the solds, because I think the solds are pretty accurate. But I mean, there's a lot of room that an agent has. This is a good demonstration of how a seller could see different things from different agents.
And I think that's where I'm getting in trouble, because looking at my numbers, the house I wouldn't have priced it on the solds that I pulled. I wouldn't have priced it 700 to 800,000. It'd been just, you know, a little bit above 7. And like one of the comps that I used was 129 Hawk Circle. And I know that's an older subdivision, but it's still on Horseshoe Bend. It's exactly 3,200 square foot, 4-bed, 3-bath. Cove location, 116 foot of water frontage, and listed for $649.9 at $203 a square foot. But see, if I'm coming in with lower comps than the next guy, I may as well just stay home.
I think if you were talking about a house on a regular lot, I think you'd be dead on, Brian.
But we have no regular lots, Jason.
Well, I mean, just not a real gentle lot. If it's just it's not unbelievably steep, but it's not real gentle. I mean, that's what I consider just a normal kind of lakefront lot.
Right.
You're not taking a tremendous amount away for the lot. You know, it's not one of those goat hills where you have to rappel off, but it's also not unbelievably flat where it adds a ton of value. So I just call those just kind of regular lots. And so I feel like that's probably the price point. And again, it's so hard to, you know, we've got a subject property that we can't even see. So,
right.
But we created a sucker on purpose.
Right.
So don't put too much pressure on yourself, because we did this, you know, we created our own anomaly just to cause these types of conversations.
Well, one of the reasons I tell you, back when I worked with Mary, we would go on tour and look at her properties, and me and another guy would be like, yeah, this is just, you know, this is way overpriced. It's never going to sell. And what happens a week later? It sells. And so I'm looking at my comps and I'm going, okay, maybe inch. And maybe, you know, so maybe I'm coming in too low on all of these things, and that's why I'm getting kind of run off on. You know what I mean?
It's worth a challenge. I mean, I think it's really important when we get into the upper end, or we get into these situations where it's a very saleable home, that we're making sure that that our range is adequate. It's a challenge.
So Brian, that house that sold for 731 or 735, whatever it was at Osage Beach, like the actual numbers, if that would have been a regular lot, we probably would have listed it at 599. But it was so gentle that it demanded 100, you know, and that makes no sense, but it just does.
But that's where I get in trouble. I've just never looked at the lot quite as, I mean, what I always saw as I mean, I explain it to people as builders here built three ways. It's basically the same topography all the way around. It's a lake, and if you want deep water, it's going to be steep. Whether the builder built the house at the top of the hill with a nice driveway and 1,000 steps to the water, or they built it at the bottom and you've got this horribly steep driveway, or they built it in the middle where it's kind of split in half. Either way, it's kind of the same. I guess I never put as much value on the topography as I should have.
Hey, Tracy asked a question. Do you pull expires to eliminate bad pricing? And now Kaylin put an answer, and I agree it is part of the 7-step pricing strategy, but I will admit, if it's a special property like this, I skip it. I hate to admit that, but I do not highlight negatives when it's a property that I want to, if I need to demonstrate to someone or to create realism in their expectation, then absolutely. But if it's a property that I believe is absolutely saleable because of the flat lot, or because of the combination of the things like this one has, I would probably skip the expired step. Is that bad to say out loud, Jason?
No, I would say, in that initial conversation that I was having with the seller, if he was hinting around that he was expecting to get $1 million, in other words, he had unrealistic expectations, and I would probably go ahead with the expireds. But if you're not, I have to admit, I don't always do it as well. But there is a time, there is a really powerful, you get those regular lots, or especially the ones with main channel, you're going to see those homes. It's really hard for those. It goes back to the way the pricing used to be 7-8 years ago. It's really hard for them to swallow that their house isn't worth what they think it is. So when that happens, the expireds are really powerful. If you get a property like this that's going to be pushing the envelope, you probably don't have to do it as much.
But man, I'm glad you said that, because it's all about justification. And you will learn, if you do this, you'll learn about the people you're sitting across the table from. And that way, if you need it, you could put it in your folder, and if you need it, you can pull it out. And if you don't need it, you can get the signature. Because it is all about justification. And if they're way out of the realm, then it's there for you.
Any more on the active summary page?
Anybody else want to share where they came in at? We gave you a $100,000 range. It's not like we put ourselves out there with our pricing expertise. $799 to $899 is a pretty big range.
And you guys don't know what we've the reason why we brought that up or created this property is because Jill had one, Brian, we've actually had 2 examples of this within our office, and it was so amazing. Jill had a house that Matt built, and it was on Kays Point, about halfway down on the left-hand side, flat driveway, flat backyard, very poor dock envelope. It was a little less than 3,000 square feet, like 2,800. So the floor plan was not big and grand. The dock envelope only accommodated a 1-well dock. I thought it was going to be less than 600,000. They ended up pricing it at 700,000. The thing sold within, I don't remember, like 60 days, and brought $650,000. I would have been more than $50,000 off. Fast forward a couple months later, Mel has these people that she worked with before wanted to downsize, and I can't remember the agent, but this house comes up, brand new on the market, and it's just down Kays Point, the same road, flat driveway, flat out the back, had a big dock envelope, and it was like 3,000 square foot, and I think they bought it for almost that much money. So, I mean, like $800,000, and it sold like that, and they had multiple people lined up to buy it. And I'm like, I never, ever would have thought that, you know, so we did this on purpose because, and it was fresh to us. We had a lot of conversation about those two properties. So you guys didn't have that, you know, you weren't part of that. So I wanted to add that.
Do you think that looking at the looking at the previous listing history of a property, does anybody do that when they're taking a listing? Do you guys take that into account as well? Like, for example, if you've seen in situations like that where that house has sold, you know, even in a repressed market, hey, they priced it here and it sold for $25,000 more, $50,000 more, or whatever. Do you ever take that into account when you're listing a property?
Absolutely. I think the more information you have, the better, and the more specific you can be, the better. So what more specific can you have than the property itself? Now, just because it does that, it could have gained 30% in value. It also may not have. You know, you're seeing that a lot with main channel homes that, you know, 10 years ago, or even 7, 8 years ago, even in the downturn, are actually bringing less now than those higher end main channel homes, because main channel has just been negatively affected more than what we saw 7, 8, 10 years ago. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I always want to look and see if it's been listed before.
Hey, Amber, you're sitting there awful quiet. What do you think about all this? You're muted. There you go.
This is great and very helpful. Thank you, guys.
Have you encountered any challenges with respect to pricing?
Let's see. I just had one recently that I did get listed, and the dock is sitting on the ground and he wanted to price like 30,000 over, but I just wanted the listing, so I went with it. I was like, okay, you know, I told him that was going to be hard, and I went over the comps. I didn't bring the comps there with me and went over them at that time, so kind of went over that, but I haven't had too many. Yeah.
We had some interesting questions when we were after part 1 from Jane Kelly about pricing, and it was interesting because she asked some real definitive questions, like, you know, what's if you have a house here at the end of the cove and 3 houses down you have the same house, what difference percentage wise does that make? Or if you have a home that has 100 steps versus a home that has 15, what percentage difference does that make? And it is so hard, but it can really affect it both ways. So it's a challenge. I think it's the biggest challenge in our market.
And a part of this class too is, you know, we're growing the content as we go too, even with these examples. So we're lucky enough to have your guys' input and Jane's input and several agents' input onto how we can explain those going forward with this class too. So we're just going to keep branching up as much as we can and the best that we can to get you guys more knowledge on how to do it.
Just kind of in general, the way that I usually look at comps is I'll try to start as specific as I can and then cast a wider net, and just continue to cast wider nets. And typically the more unique the property as far as topography or a higher price point, you end up casting a really big net. If you're pricing an expensive home that's not in Porto Chima villages, or, you know, if it's outside of kind of the main, if you're looking in Camden or Lorien, it's a high-end home, you're not going to find your comps there. So you're going to have to try to pull some comps from other areas, but then somehow adjust the price to the location. And again, there's no, or at least that I know of, there's no exact science in doing that. It's more of a, hey, I've done this and this is what I've seen over the years. Expireds can be really powerful for that. You get in pricing those type of homes, those expireds can really help you. We know this price didn't work. You know, we know the market won't support that over here.
Do you ever have to break down waterfront values, structure, etc. from Trish?
You mean like, kind of like when an appraisal does, do the actual breakdown of here's what the actual home is worth, here's what the average price per linear foot is, here's what the dock is worth? Is that kind of what you mean, Trish?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you've got a tough property that you're trying to price, have you ever broke it down to price per lakefront and then the structure? So the lot and then the structure and then put it together?
I have done it that way. Yeah, I have done it that way. It's, you know, that we get so many properties that are so unique. You may get something that has 600 feet of lakefront. It's got 2 cabins on it. It's got multiple docks. I mean, there just are no comps for something like that. So being able to break it down like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to sell. And I'm real honest with them when I'm having that conversation. I just tell them that, you know, I don't know. This is what I think your replacement value would be, or if we were able to string these along or sell these off individually, and maybe that's where you start. Again, it kind of goes back to their needs at that point, but absolutely, I've done it that way. Jeff?
I think it's really important because there's properties that you're not certain about use. So, you know, there's a home that has, like Jason said, 600 feet and it has another cabin on it. You're doing a disservice if you don't break it down somewhat. I mean, because there's so many different things that could be done to that property. And unless we break it down, you know, if we just look at it as I think you have to in those cases. If it fits in a, you know, in a regular comparable scenario, I don't usually break it down. But if it does not fit within that box, then absolutely we back into it.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Very good question, yeah. Well, how do we want to, all the supporting data is behind these active waterfront with some notes on it. And that was just based upon our conversation. There's a lot more to this class that I don't know how we've taken a lot of time, but.
Well, I was gonna say that instead of going through the rest of these slides just for time reasons, be sure to check out your workbook because all of the same information that you see on these slides right here is verbatim in the workbook as well. So be sure to study the dialogue. And the great thing about the dialogue is that it goes with each step, kind of just some dialogue that you can use as justification statements or transition statements or ways to explain the pricing strategy in itself a little bit better. And then that will help as well. And I wanna say too, with these classes, these are just examples. They're in no way what we intend for everybody to say verbatim, but they are there in case you're a fairly new agent or you don't have anything within your strategy to be able to take and make your own. So that way we're not sounding robotic either. So don't be afraid to mess around with the dialogue as well and just practice it and have it in your tool belt with what you're comfortable with and kind of branch up from there. But it is really powerful dialogue, especially when you start getting into identifying the needs and their timing needs and justifying those particular things as you're placing that subject property within the summary pages. So one thing that I do want to say before we end too is part of the dialogue as well is eliminating seller's remorse too at the end. So being sure that you are asking your sellers, you know, how would you feel if, you know, your home sold tomorrow? And most of the time your sellers are going to say, well, I think it was priced too low or priced wrong. And there's dialogue around that as well about how Jason and Jeff were saying earlier about pricing right, being able to come up and having multiple offers and giving your sellers that knowledge as well. So the dialogue is really cool. Any questions about that? Any questions at all?
No, very good information. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys. And I will, I recorded this session again, so I'll shoot the link out as well for anybody who wants to watch and revisit. And I'll also make sure to attach the comps, the summary pages and everything as well. So
Great. Thank you.
thank you guys so much. I
Thanks,
appreciate
everybody.
you coming.
Thank you.
Guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.